talking about saving tomato seeds. We didn't get to them in part two, and I think it's important. Growing great corn, growing great eggplant, and we'll finish up with growing peppers. Now let's talk about saving tomato seeds. But first, let's see which ones we can save and which ones we cannot. First, why you may not be able to successfully save hybrid tomato seeds. And some of you may ask, really, what is a hybrid? Well, it's not too magical. It's pretty simple. You take one tomato plant that you like some of the things about it and cross it with another tomato plant that might have another trait that you like to get something else that tastes even better than either one of the parents. Now let's take a look at the diagram. For example, in the red one up in the left, you may like that one because it has great texture, but you don't like its taste. And then you have another one that has great taste. So you take the pollen from one and transfer it over manually. You just take the flower or a little paintbrush and get some of the pollen and transfer it over to the flower of another. And then you save those seeds and you plant those seeds. And what you get is a tomato plant, hopefully, that has the best of both of the parents. For example, the F1 hybrid, the purple as you can see here in the middle, that comes out hopefully with something that has great taste and texture. Now the reason you can't save those seeds and get the same thing with great taste and texture, because let's look at the lower diagram part of that. When you take those F1 hybrid seeds, they have a mix of both parents. And if you selected any 8 seeds randomly out of that tomato to save, chances are only 1 out of 8 of those will give you a tomato plant that has great taste and texture. So that's the reason why it's very difficult to save hybrid seeds to get them to breed true to form. But you can save the seeds of heirlooms, which means they have not crossed or usually do not cross with other tomato plants. You save those seeds and they do breed true to form. Now, how do you save heirloom tomatoes? Well, it's pretty simple. You can see you just get the ripest tomato that you can near the end of the season, and you add water to it and let it stand for about 3 days. You then pour out the water and save the seeds. But what we do before that step that it doesn't show here is any seeds that are floating on top, you want to discard them because they probably are not going to be viable or sprout. And then after you strain them, you dry them, and then you will save them. And it shows on the right-hand side there with seed saving that you want to label, because next year you may not exactly remember what you had. Put the name, the date harvested, and the characteristics of why you saved that particular tomato seed. All right, now some of you may like eggplant, and it certainly is good if you harvest it at the right time, and that's the tricky thing here. And they do love warm soil, and you plant next to a south-facing wall, just like we did with tomatoes. Don't overcrowd, stake up, and the fruits are pretty heavy. That's why you stake them up, otherwise the plant could fall over. Now some people wonder, when is the best time to pick eggplant? Well, you pick it when it is still glossy, so look for a deep green stem also on it, and the calyx, that's the upper part there that you can see. It looks like a little star shape there, and that should not be brown, that should still be green. And the skin should be slightly elastic and spring back when indented. So what you do is push it in with your thumb, and if it springs right back and it is glossy, time to harvest. Now, one of the biggest problems people have with eggplant is this little tiny beetle called a flea beetle. And it'll come in and it'll devastate your eggplant. For whatever reason, they do love eggplant. So in order to protect it, just put a thin fabric cover over it, and that should do it. And then when you're ready to harvest, just pull off the fabric and harvest away. Now, corn is something people like to grow. There's probably nothing better than the great sweet corn in the summer, but there's many types of corns. The standard corn that I grew up with, because I'm a little older than many of you watching this, it was pretty good. But as soon as you picked it, the sugar started to turn to starch. So you had to make sure you ate it right away. But now they have different varieties called sugar enhanced, or SE. And it stays sweeter longer after harvesting. And you don't have to separate it from other corn. In other words, if your neighbor across the way is planting a different corn, they won't cross. So that's a good one. Now this other one that is super sweet, a little sweeter than I like, It's called an SH2 or shrunken gene. Now you can see the second picture down. The kernels are actually shrunken. They don't have as much starch in them and mostly sugars. So they have to be planted in very warm soil. Then there's dent, flint, and field corn. It's high in starch, and that's used for cornmeal and animal feed. And the last one on the bottom is popcorn. And it is hard, moisture-resistant hull surrounded by a pocket of starch. And of course, we all love that. And you know, where would we be? Where would our movies be without popcorn? Now let's take a look at some planting techniques with corn. Plant the corn only when the soil is warmed above 60 degrees because it does like warm weather. And notice the top photo that we planted in blocks of 4. In other words, that's the minimum, 4 feet by 4 feet. Space them correctly because it helps them to pollinate each other that way. If they're all in one straight row and the wind blows from one way to another, the pollen may not fall into the corn, and we'll show you that later. Now we like to start our corn indoors because we have a short season, and on May 1st we then grow them indoors, we start them, and then we transplant them into the garden after all danger of frost, usually the end of May. Now let's take a look at this. Here's corn, and here how it gets pollinated. It grows and it'll grow tall. At the very top, what you will see is its tassels. That's the male part, which has the pollen. And that pollen will fall down from the top into the crotches of the leaves, as you can see here. And up through that will push the newly forming corn. And all those little tassels that you see on there, all those little silks, will then grab, hopefully, a pollen particle, and that pollen particle will travel all the way down that silken thread to one individual kernel. You see, each silk is attached to a kernel, so each of those silks has to have pollen falling down on them. That's why you need to plant in blocks. And if you don't, here's what you get: incomplete fertilization, and the corn, as you can see, some of it has not developed. Now there you can see corn that is ready to harvest. You know, the tassels will start turning brown, but don't harvest just yet. What you want to do, well, let me show you this one here. This is popcorn that we let dry on the stalk like that, and we'll harvest it at that point when it's dry, and then we'll bring it in and prepare it. But now let's take a look at some corn that I do like. This one is sugar enhanced, and it does not need isolation from other corn varieties. It stays sweet longer after harvest than standard varieties. And our favorite varieties are Ambrosia and Bodacious. Now popcorn, we started indoors May 1st, planted out in late May, needs good rich soil, and then we harvest it in September when the husks turn brown. Corn needs organic fertilizer, so you make sure that you fertilize every 3 weeks. And you can do it with fish emulsion, seaweed extract, organic fertilizer, or compost. When is corn ready to be picked? When the tassels have turned brown, and from the outside you can feel the kernels have been formed. And if you push your fingernail into one of the kernels, juices should run just slightly milky, not doughy. If it's doughy, by the way, it's over. You let it go too long. And when harvesting, just cut off the infected top. If you see these corn earworms, by the way, you know, and they won't do much damage. We don't spray. We don't want to add pesticides to our crop. Now here are my favorite peppers: Carmen, Flavor Burst, Gypsy, California Wonder, Tam Mild, Jalapeno, and Lunchbox. They're all mild, and we plant those in our garden each year. My favorite hots are Super Chili, Mexibel, Anaheim, and Jalapeno Gigante. Now when you buy peppers, buy them they should be about 5 to 6 inches tall, and buy them from a local nursery if you don't start them indoors. Always check for aphids because those can decimate your peppers, and if they're on there, gently wash them off with a stream of water. And you're going to have to watch your peppers and do the same thing about every other day until you're sure you don't have aphids. And plant out in late May only when the weather is warmed. Now if you buy your peppers from a store, make sure that they are not root bound. Now take a look at the photos below. The one on the left is okay, a little bit, you know, the roots are starting to circle the pot. The one on, in the middle there is good. That's what it should look like. Now the one on the right bottom is bad. It's very root bound. Now don't go to the nursery and start pulling plants out of the pot. Just ask the nurseryman there if you could actually see the roots of some of them, and they'll be glad to oblige. Pepper plants can be planted on 18-inch centers, as you can see here. We keep them warm with a hoop tunnel, and they should do quite well for you. Now, when you grow your peppers, they'll be setting peppers, and you want to keep them moist but not wet. Every 3 weeks, fertilize with fish emulsion and seaweed extract or a good organic, and stake them up as I show here with the 3 stakes, kind of like a teepee. That'll help keep them from falling down. And this is one day's harvest from 7 plants. You'll be able to get a lot of peppers. Just make sure that you take care of them. Watch out for aphids. Water them regularly and fertilize them every 3 weeks, and you should have a lot of success. Well, that's it for part 3, so stay tuned very soon for part 4.